Today, we're going to look at DZOFilms Vespid 35mm full frame cinema prime. Now, I've actually, of course, this is my first time actually putting my hands on a DZOFilm prime lens. Yes, like many of you, I just keep on using the same pieces of gear, same brands. And, I saw this and I was curious because, of course, it's full frame. And it is a true cinema prime with 270 degrees of focus rotation, which I have to say is really smooth. And I'm just curious about, what are these lenses like, especially at the price point. Right now, these primes are $1,250 all around, whether it's B&H or another vendor. And they are T2.1s. So my question is, okay, are these going to be modern clinical, primes that we have come to expect and use, or is this going to have a little bit of a vintage character to it? So let's take a look. Let's start taking a look at some tests. Let's look at bokeh first and wide open. As we go to close focus, we see in the center of the frame, the orbs, the out of focus areas are very nice and round. Now the edges, they do ovalize a little bit. Now once we stop it down, now we're down into a 2.8. Everything rounds up a little bit, and it's a very nice, clean, out of focus areas. We don't have a lot of onion peeling or onion skins now at an f4, and everything rounds up a little bit more. f5.6 or t5.6, I should say. And now we're nice and round and very, very nice round circles all the way around. Now, looking at ghosting flare, we do have some of the, classic, planets in the solar system, but we also have these two rather large spheres. One is green tinted that it moves with the light, and the other kind of stays in place. It's a little strange. Maybe the light's just a little too powerful. Stopping down to a T2.8, we have the green orbs floating around and that large green sphere floating around, but the outer fixed flare seems to have gone away. And at a T4, it's pretty much more of the same. Now with this veiling flare test, of course we have a large bright source. We're putting it just out of frame. And you could see how much of a veiling flare we get. And if we close it down to a T4, boy, it's still definitely there. If anything, a little stronger, a little surprising. All right, let's stop it down to a T8, and oh boy, it doesn't get better. It's getting a little worse. At least that's what it seems like. This is at a T8 veiling flare. Let's step outside now and take a quick look at breathing. And again, I'm looking at the windows on the bottom left and the sky on the roofline, and to see how much they move. And wow, they're really not moving much at all. And looking at our chart, we can confirm that again, really very, very little breathing, if at all. Now, the image is jumping around a little bit. That's because I'm barrel focusing, trying to wrap around 270 degrees of rotation. And looking at the chart for distortion, yeah, we could definitely see a little bit of barrel distortion on this lens. Here's a quick check for some chromatic aberration. So we'll zoom in real quickly and focus in and out. And yeah, we definitely get some. You can saw that red tinge. I see a little bit of a green tinge on this left side also. And if we stop down to a T4 and rack the focus a little bit, we still have a little bit, still there. Now for this test, I'm going to simply find a wall with texture and square off the camera, and then in post we're going to punch in and look at the center for sharpness wide open. And as we go all the way right, we see the focus does fall off and CA starts getting introduced, of course. Same thing with the left. We're looking at something very similar with focus fall off and some CA at the edge of frame. Now we go to the bottom right, same thing. A little bit of distortion as you see too, and then top. Again, focus fall off, a little bit of CA, something we would expect from an older, more vintage style lens, or, a less expensive lens. And when we stop it down to a T4, let's take a look. Punching into the center, this is what we can expect for sharpness. All the way to the right, it's still didn't quite crisp up, and the CA is still there, although not as bad. Same thing on the left, no surprise there. Now let's take a look at the corners. We'll look at the bottom right. Yep, you know, it's still soft, and still CA is still present. Same thing with the top left. Okay, so no surprises, maybe just a little disappointment. So let's see what happens at a T8. Let's punch in 720%. That's our center. We get all the way to the right. You know, again, some continued minor improvements, but of course it doesn't quite sharpen up, and this is all the way to the left. Now we'll punch into the lower right corner, and again, you know, minor improvements. Problems are still there. So that's what this lens is going to give us. You know, I expect it won't get any better than this. So let's wrap things up with DZOFilms Vespid 35mm Cinema Prime. Now, for me, this is actually a really interesting lens that I'm probably going to look into a little bit more for many reasons. For one, with the Vespid series, it's a full line of lenses and they're already available. It's not like, you know, they're announcing them and we got to wait forever for them to fill up the lens set. These are available now as long as you can find them in stock. But the main thing about this lens is the look that it gives us, because it is reminiscent of a vintage lens, and that's of course what I'm kind of looking for, because many creative directors, or a number of them, they have asked for that for a vintage lens in the past, especially now that we're going full frame. You know, it's harder to get a hold of that unless you convert a set of, say, still lenses to cinema use, which a number of people are doing. And that has its own drawbacks and liabilities, and you know, it's a little bit of a minefield there. So with this lens, how does it have a vintage look? For starters, the flares, in particular the veiling flares. Now, this has quite a bit of veiling flare. In fact, I think you have to be very careful with that. You know, you may have to control that. The grips may be a little bit busy controlling the pings on the lens, because it can be, I think, at times overwhelming. And you know, it's not for every shot, but it's definitely reminiscent of a vintage lens. With field flatness, this does have a little bit of barrel distortion. Again, not a deal breaker, because, you know, many lenses, like say the Cooke S4s, they have a little bit of barrel distortion. And a number of people think that, you know, that's part of the Cooke look, and it adds a little bit of a three-dimensional character to a two-dimensional field that we work in. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. With focus fall off, yeah, the edges, the corners, it does fall off a little bit. Again, characteristic of a vintage glass. Now, with other things like bokeh, you know, this has a 16 blade iris, at least that's what I read. And it does have in the center a very beautiful, round, solid bokeh. Now, the corners, if I remember, they do go slightly ovalized in the corners, but again, not terrible, not a deal breaker. And one big thing about this lens is the little to no focus breathing. Now, if your lens has a ton of focus breathing and your audience like notices it and just pulls them out for just that moment, well, then you just lost your audience, and that in general is a very bad thing. So that's what, you know, really bad focus breathing can do. It can be jarring. And these lenses, they say they have little to no breathing, and for my test, I would say that these have little to no breathing. Now, in terms of build quality, you know, I'm not a technician, I'm not an engineer, I'm not even an AC, but, you know, in my hand, these lenses feel great. I mean, the focus is really smooth, the iris is smooth, the construction seems to be, you know, pretty good, and it's also, you know, fairly compact, fairly hefty in the hand too, with an 80mm front. So this is, again, it seems to be a pretty good lens. And again, I want to look into these a little bit more. Well, that's going to wrap it up for now. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one.